And we're here. We're back at it again. Welcome, family, to another wonderful, entertaining, edutainng edition of We All Be News Free Dixie for the 21st century. I'm your host for the empowerment segment, Brother Ron. Got a great one for you today. And hopefully every other day. It's like every other day in the neighborhood. But what's good, fam? There's a lot going on right now. But on we pride ourselves on slowing it down a little bit, making it plain, and putting it in proper historical perspective or context. So we're wrapping up March. I can't believe that March is almost over with. Have a special guest, a very popular young man. People are loving the interviews we have done, the breakdowns we have done in the recent past. I mean, instant We All Be classics. Before we get started, let me just read, I guess, do some house cleaning rules, whatever they call it. Read a disclaimer because free speech is priceless as far as I'm concerned. And we at We All Be pride ourselves on being advocates of free speech and of amplifying voices that need to be heard. So the disclaimer, of course, the views expressed by hosts and guests on the We All Be TV platform are not the official views, opinions, beliefs, or perspectives of We All Be News or the We All Be Group Incorporated. We All Be News is an organization that thoroughly believes in supplementing the information narrative that is usually supplied by the corporate news entities with those viewpoints and expressions which may be marginalized or ignored for a plethora of reasons. We are about informing the general public on alternative perspectives as it relates to news and information, and letting the general public be the ultimate judge in deciding on how to use said information. Informed citizens are responsible citizens, and we thank you for your support. And today's show should be an interesting one as well. So make sure that y'all can hear me without any problems. Loud and clear. Before we get too far into the show, I'm just checking the sound. Any problems? Loud and clear. Okay, I think everything's fine. But today's topic is a very timely one. What is it? Showstoppers, chart toppers, and body droppers. Telling some truths about the music biz. And we have our special guest on the dais. I think he's coming in. See if we can get him on the show right now. Hey, Brother Albert, how you doing tonight? Oh, today, rather.
Hi. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm still, hey, we keep it moving. And it's good to have you on for the trifecta, for the Triple Crown. It's the third appearance on We All Be. Very impressive.
It's nice to be back. It's nice to be back. You must be the only show that I've been on. And I've been on shows. I've been interviewed on talk shows, radio shows, podcasts, programs for over a decade. You must be the only one with a disclaimer at the very beginning. I don't think I've ever been on a show with a disclaimer. You have your own disclaimer. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, you got to.
I like that. It reminds me when I was. Go ahead. Sorry.
Now it's different now. You know how it's just crazy right now.
Yeah, it's like you're protecting yourself legally.
Yeah.
Are you protecting yourself legally by doing that?
I believe I am, but who knows? I mean, that's all it is. But my thing is, I don't believe in censoring people. Like, if you're gonna say it, just say it. You know what I'm saying? Right. I don't believe in trying to tell guests what to say or how to say it.
Oh, I see. Right.
Yeah, that's all. I'm just saying it's not it don't have to be my opinion. It's not officially. No, it's not. Right. It's not the opinion of the platform. The platform is neutral. Even to my opinions, it shouldn't affect the platform.
Right. So it's funny because when I worked in radio, when I was in college and I first did radio, I was at a radio station here in Honolulu. I was going to a school in the University of Hawaii system.
Okay.
And that's where I got my bachelor's degree, University of Hawaii, West Oahu. And then when in my junior year, I was on college radio, but we didn't have a radio station at our school. Okay. I had to go to the main campus. I wound up having a volunteer job at the main campus, which is the University of Hawaii at Manoa radio station. And I did news there for my junior year. Volunteer job, didn't get paid, but in a way, it did pay off because the first and only job that I had out after college was in radio.
Mm.
Maybe this is why one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this subject or got interested in this subject was I have a slight background in radio. I was a lower tier person, of course, in radio. I was a board op. So all I did was play music. It was funny. When I was in college, I did news. And so I was, I guess the technical term is personality, sort of, because I was a kind of anchor of the newscast that we did, which was 30 minutes, 28, 30 minutes or whatever it was, half hour. And when I wound up working in radio after college, for the brief time I did, I was a board op, so I couldn't speak. So I was playing music for 8 hours, and all the shifts were like 8 hours. So that's kind of, when it comes to music, that's kind of my background. The background that I have in terms of music was radio. I did news in college. So I was sort of, I like the British term, news reader. So I'll use that one. I was a news reader in college, college radio station. The name of the station was, let me see. I forgot the name of the station that I was on. I can't believe it.
You'll come back to you probably eventually. Probably doing the show.
I'm getting old. I'm 50, so I'm getting old.
That's good. Hey, ain't nothing wrong with that. It's better than alternative.
Right. KTUH. That was it. Sorry. I'm having a junior moment.
You fine.
Elderly people have senior moments. I have junior moments because I'm only 50 years old.
Yeah, 50 is still young. Definitely.
KTUH, I did the news at KTUH in 1991 to 92, my junior year in college. I had to come there on Fridays to do it. And then I played music in 94. This was nearly a year after I graduated from college. I graduated in 1993. Okay. And I played music for a brand, at the time was a brand new radio station, oldies rock station. And it's interesting when we talk about music, because we're dealing with the music industry here, right? Right. And now I know you're a musician.
Yeah.
How long have you been a musician?
I would say for some years. I mean, like I started messing around with the horn when I was in college about 20 years ago, about 21 years ago.
Because you went to, I believe it was Washington University?
St. Louis. Yes, sir.
Right. But you didn't study music there, I believe.
No, I was a visual art. You know, I just picked up on kind of started getting my love of jazz and I started getting into that. So
so you're a jazz musician.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm just a creative person. I write, I do like a little bit of writing. I wrote a book and illustrate. You know, I'm just like about creativity, about self-expression.
I see. Yeah. But okay, so music is more, how do I put it? You learned it. Did you learn it in school, or like did you take music classes in high school?
Well, I didn't take I was in like a visual art program in high school and junior high, but like with music, I took music appreciation courses in college and stuff, and I started connecting with musicians and other people involved in that field. So they kind of inspired me to just explore what's in there for me.
So were you learning to play, like you played trumpet, right?
Yeah.
Did you learn to play the trumpet when you were in high school?
No, I didn't touch the instrument in high school. No, they came through college. Okay. Yeah.
So it wasn't until afterwards, like say college, that you started playing instruments.
Yeah, I mean, when I started getting into this, when I started, cause I wasn't into jazz like that growing up, and I started getting into jazz and stuff when I was in school, and started like, you know how you just follow into, you go in this rabbit hole, you don't know what you're gonna get into, just following the path, trusting your intuition and stuff and instincts.
Right, I see. Yeah, I asked that because one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the music industry, because you do have a music background to a certain extent. And you play. I've seen you play. I think it's the trumpet.
Yeah.
On YouTube. Yeah. It's kind of interesting. Like you played at the graveside of some people. It's rather elegiac to me. Before that, I just want to apologize a little. I normally, like when I'm doing a stream like this, I like turn it on like a few minutes before.
No,
So
you
I'm not
good, man.
turning it
You
on.
don't need to apologize, man. You good.
Oh,
Like it's just a lot of
I
crazy
think
stuff
that's the
happening.
proper. Okay, I'm just trying to
So
be.
it's like
I feel
it's
like
a
that's the
crazy
proper
year.
thing
Yeah.
to do.
Nah, I mean
I feel
you
like
good
that's the
people.
proper thing to do.
Yeah, but you
Like,
good people, man. Like you came through the last 2 times, and it's so much stuff going on, man. I just like I don't know what's going on with people. Like I just thought, man, he ain't been active on his social media almost like day. I hope it all is okay. I'm more concerned
no,
about you
it
not
is.
being active on your social media.
Right. I
Almost
had
a day.
promoted it a little, and then
Yeah.
you know what I mean. Like promoted it a little, and then I like to promote it afterwards so
Oh
that
yeah,
people
you
will
do a good
come.
job of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you got to do that with these interviews. You got to promote it, you know, the day before, and then as you can
I
tell,
mean,
I'm not a.
it's a toll. It is a toll, but
It's
you got a lot of good stuff though. I'm about to post your stuff like your website. You know, you're a great journalist. I mean, you really got a great perspective on things, and you give a lot to people to think about. So I'm gonna post that right now. I'm gonna find your
okay,
information and post it
right.
in the
Well,
chat
I
room.
appreciate that. I also appreciate the way you introduce your show, and you really kind of treat your guests with respect. And I think that's one of the reasons I've done the show. I've seen how you treated Judge Joe Brown and Dick Gregory. I met Dick Gregory years ago when he came to the University of Hawaii. It was at the Center for Hawaiian Studies. He's a
Mm-hmm.
very interesting guy.
Yeah. That's interesting way of putting it. You're right.
Yeah, a very interesting guy. And but I see the way that you treat them. It's not that other shows treat guests badly. You know, like I said, I've done I don't know how many shows over the years,
You like
but
prolific.
it's
Yeah.
like a formalness. It's like I appreciate that. It's like, oh, you know, because I'm just an independent journalist. You know, I'm a local and regional reporter, as a local and regional freelancer, to technically state the term, for 22 years. And now I'm kind of coming back. I come back to freelance writing and looks like journalism, possibly, depending on what's out there. But you know, I was a local and regional guy, and I'm not guys like me. The strange thing about the internet is it's allowed people like me, who would never be known, to have some exposure. I hate that term. But some access to media. Like I never cared about being interviewed from the time I started as a journalist in 1994 to the time I got interviewed, which was in 2009, on a station in New York called WLEA in Hornell, New York. It's on a show called The Newsmaker Show. And I didn't care about being interviewed because I thought, who wants to talk to some freelance journalist in Hawaii? You know, and another thing I like to say is guys like me don't wind up on MSNBC. What you see on the major media, CNN and MSNBC, Fox News, are people like Esquire and Time and Newsweek and, you know, national publications. So I never had that aspect. You know, I'm not in the Beltway. I don't cover Congress in Washington, D.C. You know, I don't cover national politics in that way. You know, again, I was always a local regional guy. But the internet has kind of allowed guys like me to have a voice in larger media. So I can come on YouTube. And this is one of the things I try to tell people. Like, I have nothing against people who appear on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, although I have no respect really for Newsmax or OAN. I think they're jokes, but I have nothing against people that appear on there. But my point of view is guys like me are small fry. I don't have, guys like me don't have the arrogance and the egotism and the narcissism of reporters in a lot of these other outlets, because we're local and regional guys. At least we shouldn't. You know, I don't go around with an overinflated sense of myself because I'm a local regional guy. You know, I had a blog on Medium. Before that, I wrote in Honolulu, and when I lived in LA, I wrote in LA, and when I lived in Seattle, I wrote in Seattle. I kind of believed in writing where you live,
Mm.
you know, and that would be true anywhere else. And so, because I remember one con was here or some show I was on.
Okay.
During this media tour that I'm on to promote myself in returning to freelancing and baby journalism. But somebody was saying, well, how's this guy on YouTube all of a sudden? And that's a fair question. The reason is the store. Like, I didn't do a lot of on-camera interviews because I didn't get invited to. Like, it's not like Rachel Maddow is like calling me and saying, Albert, we got to have you on the show. When are you available?
Right.
You know what I mean?
I hear you.
And and even, and so I go, I kind of like, one of the things that surprised me, I must be boring people out there by talking this way. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I can't be long-winded and boring. I'm sorry. I know I should get into it like right away, but I wanted to have a topic.
Writer style.
So because you like, more relaxed and informal. And now that I'm not talking about true crime like Sam Cooke and other stuff, I'm like really relaxed. So like when I was on your show before, man, I was like, we got to get to this. We got to get to these cases because I got to set them up and go through my analysis. And now with this music industry issue, I'm talking about music, I'm relaxed now, so I can kind of take my time getting into it. I just hope the audience, is hanging there with me. But I understand. I can be long-winded. I understand.
Well, you got a lot to say. You think about a lot of stuff. You got a lot to say. So,
Well, I think you're kind, but it's not like, see, this is why I have been on all kinds of shows from 2009 onward. What I found was what the internet provided was the ability for guys like me, local regional journalists, freelancers, those of us who would never be in the national news spotlight, not on cable, not on networks. It allowed us a chance to reach audiences and to be interviewed and to have our points of view or our assessments or analysis out there. So from the time, oh, that's kind. Thank you, Justin. Oh, geez. That's really kind of kind, I'm so, we live in this media saturated country and it's all about concision. As someone like Noam Chomsky, political activist, and also media critic says, he says, when you look at the major media, I call it the dominant media, it's about concision. It's about how fast you can say something in the amount of available time.
Yeah.
Oh man. So all you could do when you go on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, you've got 2 minutes. And so you've got to be able to spew a bunch of pablum, or I would say spew a bunch of putrid pablum, usually, in 2 minutes. This kind of concise crap, this kind of shallow silliness that you could just spew out there. I mean, you might as well take a time watch with you, stopwatch with you, or have it on your phone and go, and just start speaking. Whereas from the very beginning, when I've been on shows, what I have noted, what I have been allowed to do is speak as long as I want. Well, not as long as I want, but I've been able to speak for an hour or 2 hours. And that's why I didn't mind being interviewed, because I could not speak in a concise manner. I didn't have to do what people on television do. And sound like a rather pedestrian propagandist. It's too much alliteration in what I'm saying, but I didn't have to sound. And so when I look at like right now what I'm doing here, I'm the real antithesis of what anyone on the other shows would do on television and even commercial radio. I've done some commercial radio, but I'm the antithesis of that because I just take my time and I speak. And I could never do that on television. I could never do what I do on every interview. So when you talk about freedom, people talk about freedom of speech. I've had freedom of speech all my life, especially being interviewed. I've been able to speak as long as I want about what I want. So I don't feel like I have my freedom of speech inhibited. I've never felt that because I've been able to say what I want. It's not exciting. It's not captivating. It's not as entertaining, but I'm not here to be entertaining. And if I'm here to convey information, that's the way I look at it, and discuss and analyze subjects. And so I'm not really here with that mentality in mind, although I'm not going to lie. It'd be fun to do the late night talk shows because I'm not a celebrity or a star, but I could do that in my sleep. Like Jimmy Fallon, I could be on that show. I could do it, I could do Jimmy Kimmel. I could do all those shows and be witty and be hilarious and be all of that. But, I'm not to quote John Voight in the movie Zoolander, I am not a professional motion picture actor. I'm a professional writer and, I was a professional journalist. So, and I appreciate some of the nice things people said, though. Like, because I'm over the years, I go on YouTube especially, and I go like YouTube. Oh, that's nice to say. Like YouTube seems to be about bells and whistles, about how hot you are. I mean, television in general is a hot medium, as someone like I think Marshall McLuhan would say. Like it's about how quick you are on the draw, how witty you can be, which I don't mind, how funny you can be, or how provocative you can be, and how controversial you can be. And if I'm controversial, so be it. If I'm provocative, so be it. I don't set out to be provocative and controversial because that's tacky and disgusting. Again, I know we're getting into areas that aren't precisely aren't related to this topic of the music industry. So I'm sorry about that.
Well, let me ask you, like you brought up television about, sensationalism. What about have you seen that Lil Nas X recent offering called Montero, the music video and the song, and also the selling of Satan shoes, devil shoes? Are you familiar with that situation?
No, I'm not.
Okay,
no, I'm
man.
not.
Yeah. So you must have been in a coma over this past weekend. That's been all the trending, like Lil Nas. Are you familiar with Lil Nas X, the rapper?
I've heard of him.
Old Town Road. Okay. Now he came out with a video last week where he, go down to hell, give the devil a lap dance, and then kill the devil. And,
sounds like he's talking about the music industry.
Oh yeah,
sounds like he's talking about the music industry.
Right there, you go. You make a deal because like people were upset. I'm saying this is old. This has been going on for forever. Yep. Making those deals. You go back to the blues, Robert Johnson and the Crossroads and stuff like that.
Right. In fact, there was a movie I think with Ralph Macchio called Crossroads.
About Robert Johnson down the Delta. That's the
infamous tale, right? Yeah. The infamous tale. So that sounds like code to me. I don't think that sounds deliberate. Like, I don't think he's literally talking about that. Oh, it could. But that sounds like code to me. Code about the music industry. That's my assessment. I don't know.
And also he was saying, like, he's openly gay too. He came out as gay. And he was saying that people been telling him all his life that he'll be going to hell for being who he was or is. So that's like, he's like, to me, I thought it was very powerful what he did, where he killed Satan after give him the lap dance. And there's a thing I remember this researching Picasso. I'm a big fan of Picasso, and he said, I think they say he said something to the effect that you want to be great, you got to kill your father. You got to find a way to kill your father in order to be great. And I don't mean like your biological. It could be like the person that you admire as your hero. And if you want to be great, you got to be able to supersede them, whatever. Surpass
supersede your father figure. Sounds very Greek drama to me.
It is.
Like
you think about
very Oedipus.
Yeah, but you think about Kobe Bryant, though, who passed away last year. I mean, he got murdered or killed, whatever. But Tracy McGrady, his childhood friend, another basketball great, was saying that Kobe said he wanted to die young and wanted to be bigger than Jordan. He wanted to surpass Jordan as the greatest basketball player. And now some people say he's not better than Jordan, but if you talk to the younger basketball players in the league, like Kyrie Irving and others, they say he's the best basketball player. That he is greater than Jordan. I'm talking about the younger basketball players. So he made that Faustian deal too, if that's true what Tracy McGrady said.
Well, I can't speak to the particular deals that an athlete would make, like the late Kobe Bryant. So I can't speak to that. But every industry, a lot of industries are really conveyor belts in many respects of corruption. There are ways that entities, because we live in an economic system, not just capitalism, but neoliberalism itself, the neoliberal component, which is kind of dominated parts of the West, especially the US and UK since the late 70s. That we live in an economic system that has a great deal of rapaciousness to it. And in my blog pieces, I myself discuss, there are a couple of pieces where I kind of deal with the economic system that we labor under to a certain extent from my contention. One is a piece that I did about the Amazon deal, or should I say the failed deal. It's called Art of the Failed Deal, the Amazon in New York City. And when in that piece, what I'm basically stating is that America has basically been taken over in many respects. At least a lot of American institutions and sectors have been taken over by corporations. And essentially it's a economic war, and it's a class war, a war that the business community, the corporate community has waged against the rest of America in a counter reaction to the popular movements of the 60s, especially. And because of that, in direct proportion to and in counter reaction to those popular movements, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and even the long time, what I would call a union movement. Of course, for example, when you talk about unions, you're talking about right now in Alabama, what's going on with Amazon and the drive to unionize there in that factory, in that part of Alabama, I believe. So the counter reaction, what I noted in my article was that and I've said this before, I think elsewhere, when we look at the American economy in general, what we're looking, I cite three big factors, because we're now when I was interviewed last year, for example, I was interviewed about how coronavirus impacts the US economy. And what I said was, it impacts the larger economy. It exposes it. We see the rot. For African Americans in general, economy has never been kind. The American economy has never been kind to African Americans. Some people would disagree with me on that, but let's be brutally honest. It has never been kind to African Americans, even in good times. Unemployment rates in African American neighborhoods and communities are always higher than that of other ethnic groups and other racial groups. And often the benefits that a lot of other communities can impact from certain programs, or whether it's government programs or even from private sector, African Americans don't get that largesse. They don't get that impact. So the American economic system, capitalism in general, neoliberalism specifically since the late 70s, has never been kind to Black people in this country. Never has, never will be. And I'm sure the right-wing Republican African Americans will disagree with me on that. They believe in the bootstrap, raise yourself up, and they believe in their, trust and believe in the free market system, which is ridiculous. It's sort of a ridiculous form of naivete. But so they would, of course, disagree with me. But that's a whole other story. I'd probably, like get a bunch of angry people at me for stating my view of what goes on in regards to some of the so-called figures. If you look at some of these African American conservatives, for example, your Candace Owens, your Larry Elder, your Jesse Lee Peterson. See, they're a product of not so much the Republican Party and libertarians, but of an effort to take individuals who don't really have any ties to African American communities, any real ties to them, and who wouldn't, and this is indicative of these conservatives. When you see these right-wingers, they don't have a constituency within African American communities. That's what I've noticed. And I've never really studied this extensively, but that's what I notice about all of these people that you see that are suddenly in the news. I mean, Larry Elder's been around for years. Candace Owens is relatively new over the past few years. And of course, Jesse Lee Peterson is another one. You look at these figures, they're not distinguished figures. They're not substantial figures. So, and they have constituencies among a sort of Caucasian right-wing constituency. That's their constituency. Like this individual's been around for years, this economist, Thomas Sowell, for example. I think there's some documentary out about him. They're trying to promote him. Now, Sowell's been around for years and he's produced books about economics. But again, he's another right-wing theoretician who wants to downplay aspects of racism, aspects of slavery, aspects of discrimination against African Americans. This is indicative of the right-wing conservative sector of African Americans. They don't want to deal with the ravages of history in this country at all when it comes to individuals in their communities. In fact, they don't really even consider themselves part of that community in many respects.
I mean, there's a couple of things like, I don't believe all black conservatives are Republicans. Now, you look at the Republican and Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has always been the white man's party. It was started to protect and promote and advance the institute of slavery. But I will have to disagree with you. Black folks had our moments. We had a lot of great moments in terms of economic prosperity. You look at Reconstruction, that really was a success, and it was shut down by lack of government support and protection. Anytime black folks had setback because we didn't have the protection as full citizens of this government, of this republic or corporation known as America. I can name the Atlanta race riots of 1906, where you had black folks getting killed in Atlanta, right? But you had a black man named Alonzo Herndon who owned 3 large, prosperous barbershops that catered to prominent and powerful white men. This is Alonzo Herndon, who was born into slavery and died a multimillionaire back in the 1920s. And he started a large and prosperous insurance company, and I believe in the aftermath of the Atlanta race riots of 1906. And this year you have the centennial of the Black Wall Street massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the black folks were so prosperous that the white folks used the black folks' airplanes to bomb their own community. You had black folks that had airplanes when they were not trying to train black folks how to fly airplanes in this country. See, we got to tell the whole truth, because some of the best educational institutions in America during Jim Crow were black institutions. I can name what is now known as Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. A lot of prominent and prosperous black folks came through that school. But we don't have any real institutions that advocate for black people first in this system. Therein lies a problem where everybody who's powerful, they control some type of institutions. Like, you can't call us a community when we allow Asians and other people to come in without paying a tax. If you look at those gangster movies, you can't operate in those monsters' neighborhoods or communities without paying a protection tax or insurance. So we don't even have a community where we could tell people yay or nay. You could come in and shut up shop, but you got to invest in said community. So I think we have played into this narrative of victimhood. Even now with so-called social justice, it's all about being a victim and getting a bed instead of being a victor and being able to tell your story on your own terms as the victor. So I mean, I can name several different
Right. It's interesting you
individuals.
bring up those points. It's interesting you bring up the points. And when you talk about Reconstruction, this gets to another point that I want to make.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the centrality of government when it comes to African Americans in this country.
Okay.
Is government has been very important. The conservative ethos is that basically anti-government. Mm-hmm. It's that government is, to quote someone like Reagan, or may not quote someone like Reagan, but basically what Reagan would say is the government, the government is the problem. It is the hallmark, the linchpin of individuals, not like only like Ronald Reagan, but also Barry.
But who told Reagan? Reagan was a B movie actor, though. He didn't come up with this. He was reading lines like, General Electric made Reagan who he was. The corporation.
Right. But what I'm saying is that is the ethos that they promoted and that they promulgated. Reagan was an actor. You're right about that. And he was a speaker too. He was speaking in the 60s for GE. He was going to different plants.
Yeah, they gave him
going off the rails, talking about the free market system.
Yeah, but they gave him the lines. He's basically a teleprompter reader, like Obama. They gave him what to say. He didn't come up with anything. Reagan did a lot of damage, but he was following the orders.
Right. Well, he's the great communicator, not necessarily the great thinker. My point is that with African Americans, the reason why government is important is because economically, when you look at Reconstruction was a failure of the political system to not only protect and support African Americans in this country, but about them being allowed to finally have not necessarily an equal stake in the United States like every other group, primarily different European groups in this country, but also being allowed the chance to develop economically, especially. And so when you had basically the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, well, the disputed election of Rutherford B. Hayes, I should say, and the Great Compromise of 1877, African Americans back then understood what was happening. They were going to lose because the federal government was going to take its troops away, which they did. They were also going to not allow Southerners to take over those state legislatures and to take out those councils, city councils, and take over those bodies of government. And they thus enacted black codes, or tried to enact black codes anyway. And the point, of course, is that what's important about government from the standpoint of African Americans is even now, a lot of African Americans work for either the federal government or for state or local governments. There's a tethering between economic aspects and the economic status of African Americans in the government. And not only was that demonstrated with Reconstruction and what happened after the Civil War, but also now economically. And so this is why when I look at these conservatives, they either are willfully ignorant of this or obviously in opposition to this, because their ethos, the Reagan, Goldwater conservative ethos, is to see government as this intrusive force. But for African Americans, to a great extent, it has not been an intrusive force. It's been a force that has provided jobs, that has provided thus wages, and that has provided a certain limited amount of benefits. Not as much as it could have because of what happened in Reconstruction.
Well, here's the thing.
At the end of Reconstruction, I should say.
Yeah, because Reconstruction was a success. It just didn't last
Right.
long enough for it to be like a game. It's like in 10
Precisely.
years, black folks came ahead, and we was like the most literate group of people within 20 years after the Civil War. So the most literate people in America were African Americans who were
It's
former
shocking
slaves.
how successful Reconstruction was.
Yeah, but
when I
when you think
look at
about Reagan, you mentioned
Reconstruction,
Reagan and
it
Goldwater.
was tremendous.
Look, you missing Reagan and Goldwater. They were not black folks were Republicans because of Lincoln utilizing the government to free us. You know what I'm saying? We was Lincoln Republicans. We were not Goldwater or
That's
Reagan
true.
Republicans. And
Right.
the Republican Party betrayed black folks with the Compromise of 1877. And you know, and you know, it was
Well, I would agree with
ironic
that.
because it's not the conservative, it was the Republicans that helped the civil rights bills of the 60s get passed, not the Democrats or the Dixiecrats or whatever.
Well, the
It was the
Democrats,
Republicans.
well, the Dixiecrats were the Southern Democrats who would ally with conservative Republicans.
But
Let's say at
Democrats
the
always
bloc.
been the white man's party,
But-
though. Whether it be big
but
city
you
or
got-
down south, they
But
always
you got
the
to
white man's
understand,
party.
in regards to the Civil Rights Act of 64, like 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, even Fair Housing Act 1968, Congress was primarily Democratic. They had Democratic majorities throughout for many years, including the 60s. So the vast majority of those who voted for civil rights legislation were Democrats. The
Now, we're
irony,
Republicans. Who came up with the Southern Manifesto?
irony is this. Well, there were Republicans that supported it, but the irony is this. The irony is that the Democratic Party, for many years, was the party that was a Southern party, right? Because it was the Southern, you talk about Dixiecrats, was also affiliated to a certain extent with slavery because it was the Southern, it was the dominant party. In the South.
Don't say just the South. The whole country benefited from slavery as an institution. The Democratic big bosses,
Well,
the big
I'm
city
just saying
bosses, are just
that
as worse
when
than
you-
plantation bosses.
Right. I'm just saying that the Democratic Party was affiliated with the South.
No, but Tammany Hall.
primarily
You
Southern
got to about Tammany Hall. You know what Tammany Hall was, right?
Yeah, New
That
York.
was the power in New York. What I'm saying is, the big cities were more segregated, and they are today than you headed down south. The big city politics.
That's a separate argument. Yeah. That's
the
certainly
Democratic Party never been for black people. That's what I'm saying.
But what I'm saying is,
never been.
the irony was that the Democrats had been a party that were not affiliated with, because African Americans had been Republicans. They were not a party affiliated with African Americans. That's the irony of the civil rights movement. And I think part of it was, you could call it strategy on the part of LBJ, and certainly some people have argued that. But it was strategy in order to get individuals, African Americans, as a voting bloc to vote in the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
It was a smart strategy on LBJ's. I mean, whether people like LBJ or not, I have my problems with him, just like Robert Caro, his biographer, does. I regard LBJ as one of the best pure politicians I've ever seen hold the presidency, bar none. And his strategy worked. It worked because you take a party that's been affiliated to a certain extent with racism and discrimination against African Americans, because they're a Southern party and because they're the home to Southern segregationist politicians, some of whom that Joe Biden served as mentors to Joe Biden, and who Joe Biden loved. You know, Robert Byrd, and who was an ex-Klan member, and I'm trying to remember, I think Stennis, and Strom Thurmond.
Yeah, but the one you ain't mentioning was probably more powerful than them is James Eastland from Mississippi. He set policy for the Democratic Party. James Eastland set the policy. Malcolm X thought so much of James Eastland as a threat to black people. He always mentioned him in his speeches. He said, "Was Eastland runs the Democratic Party." You keep on talking about it's a down south party. No, it's the American party. Like Malcolm said, anything south of Canada is the South.
It was affiliated with the South. The base was there. That's why the Republicans eventually became a Southern party, because they supplanted the Democratic Party in the South, partly by being able to play on civil rights.
But they control the big cities.
A lot of the segregationists and racists from the Democratic Party.
But look at Chicago, man. How you explain Chicago? How you explain Atlanta, Lincoln, Chicago? Daley was a Democrat, a Democrat.
Well, I'm not, again, what I'm doing is I'm looking at it. I'm not explaining racism throughout the nation.
But you
Solely
can't
from
say
the
it's a
lens of,
southern thing. 'Cause you look at you look at the
I'm making a specific case. What I'm saying is, in regards
it's
to
an American thing.
what was odd about the civil rights legislation was that the Democrats, because they had majorities in Congress, and because they were normally a party affiliated with segregation and racism against African Americans, ended up voting for and passing civil rights legislation, even though a number of Democrats, the Dixiecrats, Southern segregationists,
Republicans helped with that though.
What was that?
The Republican Party helped. It wouldn't got passed by Republican support.
Well, they were a minority, yeah, but that's true of anything within a dual party structure. If you have a dual party structure where there are two major parties, yes, there are members of another party will have to support it. And the same was true with the Republicans. Of course, the Republican Party changed a great deal.
Look, I'm gonna tell you like this. I'm in Memphis, man, and we were strong, black, proud, and Republican for a long time. And then this dude named Boss Crump from Holly Springs, Mississippi, one of the biggest political bosses in American history, was the Democrat machine. He destroyed the black vote, the black franchise in Memphis. He ran the church family out of Memphis. So this is a Democrat. The Democratic Party created the Ku Klux Klan. Matter of fact, the founder of the Klan, who was also a Scottish Rite Freemason, was his name, had the statue in DC. Albert Pike used to live in Memphis back in the 1860s and ran the Democratic Party here. And also Nathan Bedford Forrest, notorious slave trader, war criminal. He's from Memphis. Anyway, he's from Memphis. He's buried in Memphis. He's the first Grand Wizard of the Klan. I'm telling you that I'm on a Democratic plantation. You can't tell me nothing about no Democrats, because I already know about these cracker cracks, Democrats.
Well, I as I said, I'm not getting into Democrats in Memphis.
Memphis, it's an American thing. Because Apple Pike, look, the Democrat Party never passed an anti-lynching bill. Roosevelt had 4 terms to pass an anti-lynching bill. He never did. Former governor of New York, Democrat.
Right. And again, that gets into my point that the Democrats were never affiliated, or at least the Democrats, a number of Democrats, were never affiliated with any progressive legislation benefiting African Americans to a great extent. That was why the civil rights acts and legislation were a coup by LBJ and by other Democrats, and eventually got to change in larger numbers voting patterns for African Americans in regards to both parties. Slowly it was happening, but it was still competitive. You saw that in 1960 with Nixon and Kennedy. You know, a number of African Americans voted for Nixon in 1960. When you look at that presidential. By 1964, you were seeing with LBJ's election over Barry Goldwater, double digit, not so much double digit, but you're in the 90 percentile for African American vote. And from that point onward, you see a shift. You see African Americans start voting for Democrats and becoming largely Democrats. I call it a coup, because you have a party that was not affiliated with anything really progressive toward African Americans. And at least the Republicans had Lincoln and his Emancipation Proclamation. Democrats didn't have anything like that, quite the opposite. But that's why I say it was a coup, because they were able to change their image with a voting constituency, with a voting bloc. And that's why I think it was important. In my mind, it's a coup of sorts, voting wise. That's true. She was for Goldwater. She was a big Goldwater.
Yeah, well, but also you talk about Kennedy and Nixon. You know, it was a Democratic Party in Illinois that stole the election for him back in 1960. The Daily Machine, along with the mob, they was all in. Just like in West Virginia primaries, they swung it for.
Yeah, that was suspicious.
Yeah, so Hubert Humphrey could have been the nomination, or LBJ.
I mean, vote stealing. When people talk about voting fraud and forget voting fraud. You have actual stolen elections in this country, and which has been going on for years. So when people talk to me about voting fraud and all this stuff, I'm like, give me a break. I mean, you've had stolen elections for years in this country. It's nothing new. I mean, you could send all the representatives to other countries all you want.
Yeah.
You got fans, obviously.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I try to be honest. I think what people looking for is authenticity, being real with people and being yourself. People looking for that right now. And that's why I think Donald Trump, I know that's why Donald Trump was very popular among the and still is popular among the people, because he's just being himself. He doesn't try to censor himself when he speaks his truth. But that's a dangerous thing, because when you could speak truth and be uncompromised and speaking said truth, that means you can't be controlled by the system so easily. And a lot of times they want to get rid of you by any means necessary, as we've seen in the censoring of a president, which is ridiculous.
Well, Trump's another matter. He was a know-nothing who thought he could be an exception to the rule when it came to presidents, and he couldn't. Nixon found that out himself. He found out he couldn't be the exception to the rule. And that's why he left. That's why he resigned. He understood that in trying to exercise the powers of the presidency, he couldn't really do that because he wouldn't be allowed to do it.
I mean, that's why I say
it's trying to tout executive privilege. Presidents have to be very careful. They have to be very careful. The idea that you can actually be a full-scale president, not really. You got to be very cautious. But I think I'd like to, if possible. We were talking, but what was I going to say? The reality of the systems of politics are often not discussed, much like the realities of the systems of economics and of industries, like, for example, the music industry.
Right.
And when I was on your show, the first time I was on your show, we were discussing Sam Cooke. And the reason I came back with this show was there was a tweet from a artist that I particularly like, whose songs I bought her cassettes years ago, called Anita Baker. And I do like her music. So she did a tweet recently that stated that she had outlived her contracts, her deals, and she wanted her masters. And that's gotten a lot of talk within not only YouTube, but also Twitter, Facebook, online in general. And the reason why it's significant to me, why I found it interesting, was when I was on the show before, and talking about Sam Cooke was very involved in the music business, not simply as a singer, not simply as a songwriter, but in a larger entrepreneurial way. He had his own management company. He had his own labels, SAR Derby. He had his own publishing, of course, and he wanted control his music, or control over his music. And so when we look at Anita Baker, that aspect of control over music is very important. So that's nice.
People, they the information.
Oh, the money's coming in. Talk about streaming.
Oh yeah, you got
any
means, yeah.
That's better than streaming. Those rates are better than streaming.
But YouTube take a chunk though. They take that cut. You talking about it? They take about 50%.
Yeah.
That's why I tell people it goes somewhere, the Cash App and other things. But go ahead.
Right. I was gonna say, but you'll at least get a good cut of that.
More than I guess Anita Baker, in terms of the deal that they had on half a penny or less than half a penny.
Well, yeah, okay. This is the thing. One of the things I want to ask is this: you're a musician. Have you ever recorded an album?
No, I don't know. I recorded some songs back in college, playing around with a friend of mine who's a producer.
But you never put out an album.
No. Mm-mm.
And you never gotten a record deal with a album company, with a
No. No.
major label or
No,
minor
sir.
label thing.
Mm-mm.
Okay. So when Anita Baker tweeted that, it got me interested because I looked into Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke wanted control of his masters, and not control of his music in general, because his catalog was filled with top 10 and top hits. Another Saturday Night and Cupid and so forth. And what that represents, catalogs, publishing, and other aspects represent money. As you're probably well aware, I'm sure you've done research into this. The money in music comes from publishing, which is copyrighted songs or compositions. There are two aspects of copyright, basically functional aspects that I'm aware of. One is the sound recording itself, and then the other is the composition, lyrics and melody and so forth, the song.
Mm-hmm.
The sound recordings like the file or the record or CD, what have you, masters. And by masters, I mean the master recording, which is from where all what used to be called what was the term? Pressings were done, right?
Okay.
When they were creating quote unquote wax, meaning records. Now it's CDs. And now it's just digital download, digital files, really. If you're talking online.
Mm-hmm.
So the money in the music industry comes from possession, ownership, control of publishing, which is rights to songs, and of course control of the recording, which is the master recording for which you can make records. So if you own the masters, let's just look at Anita Baker. If she has control of her masters, what that means is she can put out new CDs and new compilations of her songs and make money from it, which is why she wants control of her masters. I think any musician, any artist worth their salt wants control of their masters, because control of the masters is control of the music largely. And then there's also the publishing, right? Song rights, because you get a certain amount of money, meaning royalties, for the song rights, right? From my understanding, the royalties, the deals, I'm trying to remember, with royalties are like 100% and 200%, basically, if I'm not mistaken. It's like, let me see here. Sorry, I'm looking at some notes.
That's fine.
Sorry. I like to have notes with me when I talk so that I get things right. I don't want to get things wrong. So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, if there's anyone out there, but my understanding when it comes to the publishing and basically songwriting, is that you have 100% ownership aspect and a 200% ownership. And it could be 50%. For the 100%, it's like 50% songwriter and like 50% publishing or publisher. And then if it's 200, it's 100 for the songwriter or writers and 100 for the publisher. So if you own the songwriting and the publishing, and you own all of it, you write the song and you own the publishing, you get that profit every time your song is played somewhere, right? So the money in music comes from owning publishing, owning the rights to songs, and songwriting. So that's why it pays to be a songwriter. Just simply being a recording artist and singing without any ownership of publishing, having not written any songs, and not having any ownership in regards to publishing or songwriting, doesn't make you very much.
Mm.
And although, you know, depending on what you are on an album or on a CD, like, are you a featured performer or a non-featured performer? Your average star will, of course, be a featured performer, right? Your big stars will be featured performers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you get a certain amount of money. So in the music industry, you have what is known as mechanical rights and neighboring rights. Mechanical rights are the amount of royalties. I just mentioned ownership in regards to songwriting, and publishing. Mechanical rights are the rights that are paid by an entity, a corporation that produces recordings, CDs, records, albums, whatever, usually to a songwriter. So those are what you would call mechanical. Right. Then you have what is known as neighboring rights, and that relates to the master or master recordings, as I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
And that you get the money from other entities. The monies or fees that are paid are from other entities, corporations, companies, and other institutions that play the song somewhere, like elevator music, or I guess I would say, I don't know if TV or movies would be included in this too, but it might be. So you have mechanical and you have neighboring rights. As I had mentioned, and I noted this when we were talking about Sam Cooke, right? Mm-hmm. So clearly Sam Cooke wanted, because he was a songwriter, so clearly he had his ownership stake. I don't know if it was 100% or 200%. It would vary depending on if he co-wrote songs. He clearly wanted both the mechanical rights and the neighboring rights. So he wanted as much control and thus as much royalties and fees and monies paid to him for use of the songs, for licensing and use of songs anywhere. So when you're talking about the music industry, we deal with mechanical rights and we deal with neighboring rights. Songwriting is very important because that's publishing and you want to control the publishing, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we deal with the music industry and the problems of the music industry, you often hear a lot of artists, a lot of individuals complain about the deals that are made, right? Mm-hmm. So Anita Baker, I don't know what her deal was. I assume it was a rather traditional record deal, but I don't know. I assume that the deal had a limited amount of time for the label to license and distribute her music. Because if she's stating that she outlived her contracts after 30 years, right, that means that the masters would revert to the artist. In her case, Anita Baker. I assume that's what's going on with her. And I assume that's what happened with her deal. What she wants is hegemony and control over the masters. When she made that tweet, she's basically making a declaration. I think she noted, please give me the masters or please hand it over. But at one point, I think she said that she was going to have to fight for control of the masters, which is more than likely. Again, as I state with the master recordings allow you to make all kinds of other recordings because those the key. You have the masters because then you can make what years ago used to be pressings, right? Mm-hmm. So pressings. So with control of the masters, what she is allowed to do and what she would be able to do is really profit from her own music. Mm-hmm. Create new CDs, new recordings of Anita Baker's greatest hits, Anita Baker's love songs, Anita Baker's songs from, I'm trying to remember, songs from the 80s. She could put
Right.
out CDs. And if she owns it, she'll be able to reap I don't know if she's written the songs there. I don't know. But if she owns if she owns the master, she'll at least get the the neighboring rights for those recordings that she could put out because she owns the masters. That's a key for, I think, any, at least musician with any brains, is they want control of the music, meaning the masters. If they don't, and a lot of complaining comes from a lot of musicians because they're forced to, in order to get into the bloodstream of the music industry, they're usually forced to make deals with major labels. The top three, of course, being Universal Music Group, Warner Music Group, and Sony. I think those are like the big three or something. So in Anita Baker's case, I haven't seen her contract, obviously. I've only seen her tweet. So I assume that she had a traditional deal with the music labels, right? And it will vary depending on what kind of deal that you have with the labels or in general. That's why I said control over the masters is important because you control the music and you can produce CDs and recordings and make the money off of it, right?
No,
and control over the publishing is important because then wherever the songs are played, you'll get a cut, you'll get a certain amount of royalties, a certain amount of fees. That's where the real money is in the music industry. And most people don't understand this because they're led not to understand it.
That's about most things, though. That's by design.
Right, that's true. You're right.
Because we in the media business, we know that. We understand that.
Right. But now there's a lot more information available, publicly available, about how the music industry operates. And people can find out. They can do their own research, just like I did, right?
Yeah, but you went to school to be a journalist and you learn how to critically think. You know, you're a critical thinker. And a lot of folks, for the majority of the part, are not critical thinkers. So they don't even know what they're looking at because they're not hiding it. They're hiding it in plain sight, meaning that we're going to show you all this, but you ain't going to understand what you're seeing, let alone understand what you're seeing and how to process it. I want to thank the people who are sponsoring donations. Nicole Bryant, Sister Nicole Bryant through the Cash App, and also Cross Roofing of Atlanta Cross and Unc Must Be Logic. Thank you for supporting this streaming because they are definitely trying to censor and demonetize platforms like this. So I appreciate y'all support and y'all ears that are open and your minds that are open to receive the information. But I just want to point this out before, Aretha Franklin, I got Aretha Franklin on my mind. Anita Baker had such a hard time getting signed to a deal. Nobody wanted to sign her. And now they don't want to give her back her intellectual property that they didn't believe in at first, off the bat. And then you got the thing with Chappelle. Now I think Dave Chappelle shifted the paradigm for a lot of people when he told Netflix to stop streaming the Chappelle show until he get his rights to his show. Because a lot of people don't help control the rights to his show. Flip Wilson was an amazing businessman because he outright owned the Flip Wilson show.
Right.
Yeah,
that's what I found out when I read about
Chappelle didn't own the show. Yeah, but Chappelle didn't own the show. Yeah.
Sorry. That's what I found out about Flip Wilson when I read a biography of his. That when he got to NBC and he got his show on NBC, he negotiated a deal where he would own the show. So he basically ran the show as producer. I'm trying to remember the deal that he had. From what I've read, I think he made something like 20 million at least off the show. Remember that the Flip Wilson show was a top 10 show. It was a hit show. I mean, I'm not talking top 20. It was a top 10 show. It was one of the top.
You only had the three major networks. You ain't about this competing media like you do now. So you had three major networks. So yeah, definitely.
He had ownership of the show, which I couldn't believe when I read it. I could not believe he got ownership of the show.
Because he was a
very
black
hard
man. Because he
for
was a black
any
man.
performer,
Okay.
for any actor to get ownership.
Mm.
I think maybe Johnny Carson had ownership of his show, Tonight Show, but it's very difficult, very hard to get ownership in television. And Flip Wilson had ownership of his show. And I think he came back in the 80s and he did a sitcom. I'm trying to remember the name of it. But he basically, I think he had enough money to live on for quite a while.
Yeah,
I mean,
he was Henry. He didn't worry about no money.
He made at least 20 million, if I recall correctly. And maybe that I recall reading 20 million. This is off the top of my head, just to let you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I recall reading he made 20 million off the show. I was astounded that he owned the show. I just thought,
Like,
from what I know of television, it just doesn't happen that way. I mean, I thought this guy is savvy. I mean, he just, and people who were guests on his show said he ran a tight ship.
I believe it.
He ran a tight ship.
You got to think about, he played court jester. Don't mean he was a fool in real life. He played the part of court jester. It's like Desi Arnaz. You know, Desi Arnaz created the Untouchables TV show. He actually grew up with Al Capone's son down there in Florida. So he was close to Al Capone's son when they was growing up. And he created the Untouchables. This is Lucille Ball's goofy husband on I Love Lucy. He had a sharp mind as a businessman.
Right. I know they had that company, Desilu. And Desilu's the production company produced Star Trek, Mission Impossible, and a number of other shows.
I think that was not. Is it true that Lucy and her husband were like one of the first people to really get involved into getting royalties and whatnot, controlling their intellectual property through the TV medium? Because a lot of the older people didn't get
I would have to read more about Desilu. I mean, I know a little about Desilu, but they were involved in producing other shows because that was their production company, and they were involved in producing other shows. They didn't just do their thing; they were producing other shows. So, so that's why I say ownership is really important. Control is really important, and in music, it's all important. Having control of the masters, having songwriting, or at least as much of a cut of the songwriting as possible, and meaning publishing. That's really important. And it's in general trying to get both mechanical and neighboring rights to you. So in the case of Anita, you mentioned Anita Baker. You said that she had a hard time getting signed. Was this when she was first starting out in business?
When she first started, yeah. Like I remember her talking about it some years ago about how nobody didn't want to sign her, and she was thinking about the route she could take, her savings and whatnot to get her own album out at first, which is ironic. I mean, like you wouldn't think, damn, that's a no-brainer, right? In hindsight, it's like with Jay-Z, nobody wanted to sign Jay-Z at first, and now he owns his masters to his first album, but nobody wanted Jay-Z. Nobody wanted him.
You have to look at why did they not want them? Was it a matter of talent? I doubt it. It was probably because they wanted more control and equity over their music.
Yeah.
That's probably why. It's like, in the case of Anita Baker, I'm using that as a platform to go off to examine the music industry. I don't know her deal, but it seems to me that she apparently negotiated a deal where ownership of masters would revert to her upon completion of this deal. That's what I'm thinking. And if she's stating this, she doesn't strike me as somebody who is foolish at all. But I like her, so I'm going to think I'm going to think she's smart because I like her and I like her music.
But that's to interrupt. Like Dave Chappelle wasn't stupid either, but he came from a very educated family. But everybody get due. Even Judge Joe Brown does not own it. Judge Joe Brown, my friend Judge Joe Brown, does not own his show outright, and he's a lawyer and a judge, but yet he does not own his show, the Judge Joe Brown show.
That's surprising because he was an attorney and a judge. But here's what you got to understand: entertainment law and intellectual property law and those aspects may be different for someone like Judge Joe Brown. That may not be his background. Like he may have been. I know he went to UCLA Law School because I was on a show.
Criminal defense attorney. Yeah, he was a defense attorney, criminal.
Right.
All this stuff.
So,
back.
just because you're an attorney doesn't mean you know every aspect, every part of laws per se. There are specializations, of course, with laws. Like that's why people specialize as attorneys. They get into entertainment law, or they get into maritime law,
Right.
or they get into criminal law. I assume in the case of Judge Joe Brown that he doesn't own the show. Again, in television, what I mentioned is it's very hard to own shows. It's very difficult. They don't want to. There's no way that a network or production company or a channel want to let go of ownership stake in a show, because that is where they're going to make their money, through syndication. That's where the money is in television anyway. It may be a little different now. It's not just syndication, but that's largely where it's been. What they do with television shows is, what they do with TV shows is they deficit finance the shows. I mean, we're talking networks, they usually do. Maybe different with cable and streaming, but generally speaking, they deficit finance shows. The networks did. So that means they're financing shows for however long they're on the air. Like all the shows that you've seen on the networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, even Fox, or more likely deficit finance, right? They're putting money on a per episode basis, and it will vary as over the years. It might have been $1 million per episode, or it might be $2 million. I don't know what the latest per episode cost of network shows is, whether it's drama or sitcom or what have you. So they deficit finance for however long they're on the air. And then when you get to enough episodes, usually 100, but not always, they will go get syndication deals with all these stations across the country, right? And remember that TV shows were not owned by the networks. It's a very important point. For a long time, the networks did not own the TV shows. They were owned by the studios. So when you look at shows like Laverne and Shirley and Happy Days and so forth, I don't think Gary Marshall owned those shows, who created them. Those are probably owned by Paramount. And now I guess that's with those shows. So with studios, because studios produce it. So if you see shows with Paramount, Warner Brothers, Universal, those are shows produced and owned by those studios, because that's how it worked. The movie studios got into the TV business in the 40s and 50s, because television, well, in the 50s primarily. Warner Brothers is one of the earliest to do that. And so the ownership is very important to the studios. Obviously, they're not going to let go of those shows, right? So in the case of Judge Joe Brown and his show, I don't know what studio owned or what company produced that show.
Yeah.
But the money would be in ownership. It's true of anything. TV, movie, music. Ownership is the key. And the average artist, an average filmmaker, an average producer will not get ownership.
Now, Judge is getting paid. He getting royalty, but they owe him back money too. He talked about on my show how they'll use his earnings to subsidize movies and other projects. Like, you know, they'll people on. I mean, this game is a trick. It's a game. It's game.
That's like the music industry. They use the monies they raise from these artists to subsidize other artists. The ones that are making millions of dollars, the big stars, are used to subsidize the smaller stars and not smaller stars, but the smaller artists, the unknown artists, and everyone else, and other aspects of the music.
I would just want to add this is a quick example, a more recent example of that is like when Tupac earnings on Death Row was used to help pay Nate Dogg's child support.
I remember hearing about
earnings. Yeah.
Well,
so
see,
that's crazy.
This gets into another aspect of the music industry. When you look at the music industry, the artist, meaning the performer, is essentially a product. I'll give you like this is a pen. Like there it is. Like this is a pen. This is a product, right? This product would probably cost. Let's just say this pen cost, I don't know, $2, right? I don't know how much this pen would cost to make. Let's say the pen costs 10 cents to make, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to sell this pen for 10 cents. You're going to sell it for as much money as you can to recoup the basic costs and in order to profit, right?
Yeah.
Much like this pen, the music artist, the singer, and the band are a product. And what the music industry does is they make their money off the product, which is the singer and the band. So they are a product. And I'm not talking about the album. I'm not talking about the CD. I'm talking about the performer, the singer, the band. The music industry regards them as a product, whether they'll say it or not. They are regarded as a product, and they make money off the performer, this product, the performer, the band. Now, that is more the case these days than in the past. And the reason why it's the case these days compared in the past was prior to about the 2000s or so. Record companies were making money primarily by album sales, record sales, right? And so they would normally have, from what I understand, 80 plus percent, 85% split, 85 to 15%, or more than 80% split. The label would take the 80% or 85%, and the artist would get the 15%, right? What the artist made money from was touring and also merchandise and other ancillary aspects. And so the record companies weren't as interested in that, at least from what I understand. Again, I'm using my research and I'm doing this. I'll state this. Like anything as a journalist and as a writer, I'm not an expert, but I do enough research and I look up enough information and gain enough knowledge so I can speak about a matter intelligently. But I would never pretend to be an expert on the music industry. Just someone who's an intelligent enough layman to discuss it. And so just to put that out there, that's my modus operandi as a writer and journalist. So before, my understanding in my research that I've done, it was like an 80 plus, 10 plus percent split between label and artist, right? Now, my understanding is in the 90s, CD sales were going through the roof. Albums were selling like hotcakes. They were making millions upon millions of dollars, meaning the labels. What happened was a little thing called Napster. Now, I knew that Napster had an impact because I remember Napster. What Napster did was it basically broke the monopoly of the music labels in terms of access to music. See, before Napster came along with their file sharing system, you had, in order to listen to music that you liked, you had to do what? Listen to the radio.
Right.
Go to a record store and buy an album or a CD, or find a way to get a recording somehow, right? What Napster did was because you had the World Wide Web and the internet, they created a guy called, let me see, Sean Fanning, along with a guy called Sean Parker, created Napster. And so they create this file sharing system where, and it was probably, and from what I understand, it was probably because the amount of information per each file was smaller, because it was easier to download a song because it's not like a movie or a TV show, which would create more information, more digital information on the file, longer to download. With a song, there was less information, so it's much easier to download. So what you had with Napster is you had an ability to file share, because it's a file sharing system, go to a song, that was probably out already or going to be out, and download it and listen to it. Now, of course, we have something called streaming, right? Apple iTunes or Apple, and of course, Spotify. So, and streaming is at the core of the music business right now in terms of the profit streams and revenue. It's part of the core of the music industry. So you have Napster. Napster comes along. If you remember back then in the 90s, I think that Napster was created in 1999. You remember the 2000s? The labels were terrified of Napster. They did everything they could to destroy Napster. And to a certain extent, they succeeded. But what I believe they gained was knowledge of a new way to create revenue for themselves. And eventually you had the streaming services. But here's what I understand came out of that. Now, I mentioned the 85-15 or 80, more than 80, more than 10% split between the label and recording artists, right? What happened after Napster came along, you're seeing decline in record sales, right? You probably remember that. Because people are going to Napster and they're going to download this song or entire album and they're going, why do I need to go to Tower Records, Sam Goody's? Why do I need to go to these stores to buy music? I could just go to Napster. I can go and get it, and I can, not even either get it for free or I don't have to pay that much. So these record companies come out with what are known as 360 deals.
Yeah.
You probably heard of it. A 360 deal, unlike the past, where the record companies were making money from the sale of albums, the sale of CDs, and they were huge in the 90s. They were spiking upwards. They were making millions of dollars. What happened was they were losing money. Records were losing money in the 2000s. And so they came up with this 360 contract. And I'm surprised they didn't come up with this before. That's a surprise to me, is that the music industry didn't do this prior, for years before. Because of their larceny of nature. But what happened is now the music industry takes 360, which is everything. They take money from the tours. They take money from merchandising. They take money from publishing. And they take money from any appearances that are made, everything. And what surprises me about these 360 deals and the creation is I'm surprised they didn't do this before. The way the music industry is set up, there is an old saying. What's the saying? I heard this on some radio show once. People used to say about getting a job. Yeah, it was a great job. It was like $5 an hour and all you could steal. That's the nature of the music business and the music industry. It's all you can steal. Now more than ever. So the 360 deal to me means they control everything if they're signing you up. And in many respects, when you look at the music industry, it's kind of like publishing. Of course, there's song publishing, right? Like publishing in regards to your song, your composition, as it's technically called. But in the publishing industry, meaning book publishing industry, authors get advances. In the music business, record labels give artists advances when they have deals. Why do artists get advances? Because these advances are what are known as recoupable expenses. Recoupable meaning they can get back these expenses, and they will get back the expenses. That's part of how the music industry works anyway, is you have these recoupable expenses. In other business terms, you talk about investment, right? Let's just use other business terms. I'm not a business guy, I'm a left-winger, but let's use the business lingo, right? If you see an artist, but much like the pen, here we go.
All right.
Artist is a product. And so like a product, you have to invest in said product, right?
Yep.
So when you're paying the advance, they need to get that back. So they need a return on investment or ROI, right? And so
Mhm.
what happens is that because the artist is given this advance, which they could spend on their rent or food or booze or whatever it is that to survive,
Right.
they have to get that back, meaning the label, the record company has to get it back. And so when you hear recording artists, singers, talk about they're in debt to companies, they're in debt to labels, they're in
Mhm.
debt because of contract, because they need to pay back the recoupable expenses. Doesn't matter how many tickets you sell on tour, doesn't matter how many records you sell, or should I say CDs or albums, doesn't matter. If you owe X amount of money, not only in terms of expenses, but in terms of costs, you have to pay that back, no matter how much you make.
You know what? I
What
would. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, what the recording artist is, this product, unlike this pen, what the recording artist is, what the singer is a
Mhm.
revenue stream. They're a direct stream. It's almost like the artist is a literal property, like a real estate property, and you're making monies based on that property. So the way that the music industry is structured, in terms of the traditional contract, you have all these little costs, right, that are deducted from the artist, right? Breakage, for example. What used to be if an album broke or something happened to album, there's a breakage cost. The cost of making a music video, usually deducted from some aspect of the performer's pay or or from the performer, how much they make. You also have these other costs. Every cost you can imagine is basically deducted from either the revenues of the performer or any monies accrued to or dealing with the performer. So what happens is that the performer, the singer, becomes a loss leader and not a profit center. The only way that that performer is a profit center is to the label. They make the money because they are deducting the cost. They are deducting monies. They are making revenues off of that performer. The performer isn't making money. This is why when I've interviewed a couple of people who are recording artists and musicians, they said, I had to stop touring or I had to stop being involved because I wasn't making money.
Mm-hmm.
For example, there's a documentary about a Canadian rock and roll band, a hard rock band called A.L.L. that I saw. And at one point, they're doing on this tour of, I don't know, Europe, bare bones tour. And they were talking to fans and they say 99% of artists are broke. They don't make the monies they should because of the way this industry is set up. And he's right. Those are guys that were, had some degree of success in the 80s, for example, went on tour. And then these guys end up, one of them was, I think, working construction somewhere, or and another guy was, working for some food catering company.
Okay.
This is what often happens with musicians, right? You hear about musicians being broke. Michael Jackson, before he died, talked about African-American musicians and performers getting ripped off.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that music labels and companies will do anything, lie, cheat, and steal, and do anything to make money. He's right. What's also interesting is what Prince said. I heard I heard him actually say this. It was audio, but he had noted that because he had fought with Warner Brothers, or Warner Music, I should say,
Mm-hmm.
for its masters. And what he said was from his third album onward, he had basically produced his album, meaning he probably had by this time his own studio and his own production facilities. And he probably mixed his album, recorded his album, mixed his album, and produced his album. And so what he was looking to get were, of course, his masters from his previous albums. And he was looking to retain that ownership. So from his third album, I think, onward, he did that. And what he noted was, it's not a matter of antagonism toward them or hatred toward them, meaning the labels. It's a matter of logic and common sense. You know, FedEx will deliver your packages, but they don't pretend to own it. If you look at these labels as delivery platforms and as distribution platforms, why do they get to own the masters for years and years and years? And as I mentioned before, the reason they do not only is the deals, the contracts, but it's because the money comes from ownership. The money comes from control. The money comes from having the masters, because you can produce as many new recordings and many new CDs as much as you want and make money from it. And that's why the labels wanted control forever, eternity, over people's music. Now, that was beginning to change. I know in Sam Cooke's case, his manager, Alan Klein, had negotiated a deal with RCA for what, 30 years, licensing for RCA to license it for 30 years. And I think for Sam Cooke, you get like 6% of grosses. And I'm trying to remember the royalty. It may have been advance of $500,000, something like that, over a couple of years, right? But what's significant about that is RCA only retains the rights for 30 years, right? So that's interesting considering Anita Baker. She says she obviously outlived her contracts. So it may have been 30-year contracts for licensing and distribution on the part of whatever the label was. And now she wants the masters reverted to her and to get the master rights. Again, I've stated why the masters are important. Control the music, because that's where the money is. I use television as another example, right? The studios will have control over those TV shows because that's where the money is. Money in syndication, where the real money is. And also nowadays, DVDs and streaming and all this kind of stuff, right? Control over the properties, intellectual properties, and properties in general are important because because that's where the streams of revenues are coming from. Licensing and broadcast and all kinds of other ancillary markets and other kinds of markets. So that's important. Go ahead.
Now I would think about Chappelle. All this stuff it does. This is like George Carlin, the great comedian, said. This is an ownership society. If you don't own anything, you don't help. You know. But you know, go back to Chappelle. He talked about how this lawyer and he signed some stuff when he was young. Cause you got to get in somewhere, right? Before you know, oh, Anita Baker, she's a great one. She struggled to get a deal. Same thing with Jay-Z. They said Jay-Z was too old. Like he was about 26 or 27 when Reasonable Doubt came out. Now he's in his 50s and he's one of the most successful rappers of all time. I mean, he's still selling and still relevant and got more Grammy wins than any rapper in history with 23. So, but back then it was like, oh, we don't know about him. But like what Chappelle was saying, that he saw the language in the contract said in perpetuity they could use his name. Now he came from a very educated background, but even he was duped at the beginning. But what I love about Anita Baker is her willingness to fight to put her life on the line because you know what they did to Sam Cooke and Otis Redding and Michael Jackson. Because they killed Prince on the anniversary of him getting that deal from Warner, getting his master back on the 1-year anniversary. He died around that time. So they won't even let him enjoy the fruits of his labor. And this system is so wicked because you look at African Americans, they will not let us enjoy or participate fully in the fruits of our labor, not only giving this country its economic engine, but also its cultural identity with the music, with the arts. So I think it's like until we are willing to not only just fight, but to also die for what we won't have anything.
Well, that's especially true when you talk about African American artists, especially true.
Mm-hmm.
In artists in general, but especially African American artists, it's a tough road to hoe because these music labels and these other aspects, the music industry has really been set up. That's why I say it was like all you can steal. The music industry is pretty much set up as an industry based on a certain amount of theft.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pirate, in a sense, it's a pirate industry. Normally the term pirate means outside the norm, like pirate radio stations. But when you think about the music industry, it's a pirate industry because it's set up to plunder, to rake in as much as possible, to take over. I mean, people may think I'm going a little too far here. I'm not. I'm trying not to, but I'm not. It's a pirate industry. And they're set up to control as much intellectual property and as much property in regards to music as possible. Catalogs, songwriting, and masters, so that those revenue streams will flow easily to them and they will be able to make the money. And they're not set up to be fair. They're not set up to be just. You could say that about a number of other industries. It's true. Yeah. But music industry stands out. They really are among the most cutthroat and vicious industries I've ever seen in my life. And I cannot for the life of me understand how people fare in the music industry. I know people may love music and producing music and doing it, but I cannot for the life of me understand. As someone who as a freelance writer dealt a little with contracts, I've had to in my line of work, and dealt with some financial aspects. I wouldn't want to be, there's no way in hell I would want to be any singer-slash-songwriter and be involved in the music industry. I'd be too furious with my money being taken from me.
We know
profit and control. There's no way that could.
With celebrities in general, a lot of them have like inferiority complexes, low self-esteem, the need of approval or roar from the crowd. Because I remember when Kevin Costner spoke at Whitney Houston's funeral, he was saying that she was gifted, but she didn't believe that she was really that good. She always doubted her ability or talent. And even you look at how they use drugs and stuff to control the artist. You look at Elvis Presley with Colonel Tom Parker. Elvis, he had some acting ability, but he might want to do a role like Marlon Brando or James Dean, but Colonel Parker wouldn't let him do those roles. And
right.
and he didn't. And it kept him drugged out.
Right. Parker was. I'll say it right now. Colonel Parker was a scumbag.
But he made a lot of people great. He has a lot of great artists.
He's a useless piece of crap. I mean, he's an ex-carny. I don't know if you know about guys who worked in carnivals, but you never can trust those guys.
And also they say he killed somebody, right?
Never trust the
from Europe. Huh? He escaped Europe. He was facing
he's basically from Holland. From what I read a book on him. He's essentially from Holland.
Yeah.
And what I had read, I mean, this is off the top of my head, but what I recall was he may have killed someone.
Right.
In Europe, which is why he left. And he was here in Hawaii for a little while, for a brief time. But Colonel Tom Parker was indicative to me of the music industry, even though he was a manager. That guy when I look at the music industry, even though he was not a music executive or anything like, he's a metaphor for how sleazy and disgusting aspects of the music industry are. Colonel Tom Parker. He wanted Elvis to make certain kinds of movies so that they would make money. Primarily, he would make money. He had a certain, again, it's the control factor, right? He didn't want Elvis to do serious movies, even though Elvis wanted to do them, because he wanted to make these shallow, stupid hits that would make money and thus revert some of that income to him. He wanted Elvis to make certain kinds of music because he wanted to make money. You control the artist. You control, if you're a manager. So that's kind of a metaphor. In this case, he controlled the artist. He wasn't a record label. He wasn't a record exec. He wasn't an A&R artist repertoire. He wasn't involved in the industry to that extent, but he's a metaphor for what the industry does to artists. It owns them body and soul. And in terms of management, that's what Tom Parker did with Elvis. Owned him body and soul.
But also, he
And
did have experience in managing that type of talent because he did manage Gene Austin and Eddie Arnold and Hank Snow and Tommy Sands early in their careers. So he had a background of manipulating and controlling talent.
right, as some of these managers do. Yeah. But
you know
when you
what?
look at the, go ahead, sorry.
No, like the industry and the music industry, it's like the least musically talented people make the most money. The folks with the less talent make all the money, man. It's like it's weird to me. You know, what we talking about
Oh,
right
they're gonna
now.
love. Oh, they're gonna
Ain't
love hearing
wrong.
that. They're gonna love hearing that, Ron. They're gonna love hearing that.
But you know, but when you just you been confirming it. But you know, what's interesting is I talked about Lil Nas X earlier about his video Montero about him lap dancing with the devil. But I remember reading something about Janis Joplin. She made, I guess Clive Davis made her offer she couldn't refuse because he took her into a room by herself to sign a deal. Next thing you know, she dead at a hotel out or motel out in L.A. near where Bobby Fuller died or passed or was found dead. But I'm saying the idea of sex magic, you know, using sorcery, using witchcraft. No, this is not just with the music industry. You got the father of the space program, Jack Parsons, who was into sex magic, who was a close friend of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, and he also was a disciple, excuse me, of Aleister Crowley. You know, I'm talking about this Jack Parsons guy who's the founder of the space program here in America.
Well, I've heard of Parsons, but I can't speak to. I tend to focus on the rational world.
Well, I was saying with Janis Joplin, she believed that the way to consummate a deal was to have sex. You think about Cleopatra. She had them type of sex magic pacts with Caesar and Mark Antony. So like they would believe like you got to have sex till the deal.
Well,
like
the sex component is another tricky one. I haven't gotten into that aspect. That I'm not as familiar with. I've concentrated on the financials and not the
But talking about Ronald Reagan, right? We talking about Ronald Reagan. He was into his wife Nancy was into astrology, and her godmother was an old school, you know, back in the day silent film actress star who had some property in L.A. where they would have all these large orgies. This is Nancy Reagan's godmother. Right. I can't think of it right now.
I know who
Ronald Reagan was in. They was into astrology, all this stuff. So it's something to this occult stuff.
Right. Well,
that's part of the entertainment industry.
That's out of my league.
Okay, okay. Well, people look it up. People look it up.
That's not my department.
What about
you? Not that aspect.
Like spirit, spirit cooking, Hillary Clinton and Jay-Z and all them. Spirit cooking.
Huh?
Spirit.
No,
cooking.
I don't know. No, I don't know anything about that.
I mean, I'm saying Jay-Z. Like, why is Jay-Z got? He couldn't get signed at first, but he got more Grammy wins than any rapper. You got rappers like Tupac that never won a Grammy. Snoop Dogg never won a Grammy. Nas just won a Grammy. You mean that Jay-Z is the greatest? You know that he's the only rapper that is deserving of 23. Kanye got 22, I believe. Or maybe Kanye got. I don't know. One of them got 23 and 22. Are they the most talented of their field in their field?
Well, I'm not on the. I can't speak to the Grammys. That's a whole other department. And I haven't really studied the Grammys or who wins Grammys and who doesn't. There's a lot of, let's be honest, there's a lot of fraud. I mean, outright fraud in the music industry, or there has been a degree. All you need to do is look at Milli Vanilli, not just Milli Vanilli.
I used to love them, man.
What? You used to love Milli Vanilli?
Yeah, back in the day, like Blame on the Rain, they had some catchy stuff, man.
Yeah, no, I'm just joking.
Okay. It was big, though. I remember when that happened when the
I hated Milli Vanilli. I hated Milli Vanilli. I couldn't stand them.
Okay.
I was perfectly glad to see them go down the tubes. But now I have some sympathy for them because I understand what happened to them. They got screwed. They got screwed by Frank Farian, the producer, whose idea was to have them front and basically be a facade. It's what I would call facade music. It's not real music. It's facade music. It's not only Frank Farian and what he did with Milli Vanilli. Before that, he had a group called Boney M. which was a big hit in Europe. It was the same thing, having models and a dancer, models and dancers front this band, and he was the guy who sang the vocals, at least on the first album. Really processed vocals, but Boney M was the predecessor to Milli Vanilli. That was successful in Europe. Milli Vanilli came along and was successful across the Atlantic. They were successful in Germany, which is where his studio was, Frank Farian's studio was, but they were successful in the US. And that wasn't expected. And these guys were locked into a 3-album deal with Farian. And he had paid their advances, not huge money, but he paid advances. He was paying them money, other kinds of money, giving them money to live on. So now he's like, they didn't want to. So reportedly, if one of the members was interviewed, it said that they wanted to sing, and they had actually put out an album. I forget the name of the album, but both members of Milli Vanilli had actually put out an album prior to Milli Vanilli. Didn't go anywhere, but it was like a group they were a part of. In any event, reportedly, they thought they were going to sing. Of course, they weren't, because he had Charles Shaw, guy named called Charles Shaw, and some other recording session musicians and others sing Milli Vanilli, actually sing Milli Vanilli's tracks. And so they were locked into this contract, and they thought, yeah, this won't go very far, do okay, and we'll be able to get out of here and move on. That wasn't the case. If we are to, and of course, Farian blew the whistle on it himself. He came out and said, yeah, they didn't sing on the track. They didn't sing in the album. Again, the cruelty of the music business. And of course, Milli Vanilli was not alone. You had Black Box, you had CNC Music Factory, Black Box, which used, what's her name? Loretta Holloway, I can't remember her name, her vocals. Also, Black Box had used Martha Wash, as did CNC Music Factory. They did pretty much the same thing, for the most part. Took their demos, took their recordings, and used it. Black Box had a huge hit. Right in Time was a huge hit in the UK, and you also had a huge hit with CNC Music Factory. Everybody Sweat sold like 5 million. 5 million. Fraud sells in the music industry. So Milli Vanilli was not alone. You had others.
Well, you remember, I know the great rock and roll pop producer Phil Spector. He would use different artists and credit other artists on people vocals. They weren't them. And also, you think about Quincy Jones when he was spilling all that tea a couple years ago. He said how Sgt. Pepper didn't really play on some of those recordings for the Beatles. That they brought in somebody else, like some jazz musician, to play for him. They told him to took a break, let him go out for lunch, and they brought in some very seasoned jazz musician to play drums on some of his stuff. And also,
wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's like such a musician.
Yeah, that's part of
the game. They wouldn't matter because I would be curious as to. I what's his name? The producer. I can't remember his name. Of the Beatles. For what was it, Parlophone, and then Thorn EMI Records when they were recording. It'd be interesting in seeing what they. Yeah, Martha Wash was part of the Weather Girls. Like I said, fraud's part of the music industry. It's a big part of it.
It's territory.
It's a big part of what I said. Milli Vanilli. I said this elsewhere. I said Milli Vanilli is part of the template for the music industry. I would say from the late 90s onward, because people talk about some of these major stars their songs tweaked, there's somebody else singing possibly these days, and of course you have auto-tune and you have all these other technological aspects. But you know, it's a industry that is not set up to be fair. Now, you could say that about a lot of industries, but the music industry is set up to be as unfair as possible and as unequal as possible. You see it in streaming, for example, right? Spotify. I mean, I know Taylor Swift is not happy. A lot of artists aren't happy because what happens in terms of the streaming services, like I'll take Spotify, for example. And my understanding is like the vast majority, like 90% of the profits from streaming go to about 1% of the artists. I guess it would be the top tier artists, right? Like one video that I saw was interesting. They broke this down, right? So with Spotify at one point, according to, I believe it was their own data, you had 1.4% that were profiting of artist of property. At about 3 million recording artists on Spotify, it was like 43,000. So the remainder were, or a good amount were 48.6, I'm sorry, 98.6 remaining, 2,957,000. Of that 2,957,000, or 98.6%, they're getting 10% of the streams. That averaged out, I guess, for the 98.6% of them to about $11 a month. So when people talk about streaming and what's going on in the streaming business, they're talking about highway robbery, because the streaming services are set up much like the music labels are. And from what I hear, the music labels are invested in some of these streaming services, like Spotify. They're set up like the labels. These streaming services are set up to basically live up to the motto that I mentioned before, all you can steal. They're set up to be unjust, they're set up to be unfair, and they're set up to profit as handsomely as possible off of recording artists. Reportedly, these artists are devalued to such an extent that they're not making any money. Another example that I've seen, for what I've seen, videos that I've seen and other things I've looked up, in the amount of money per stream. Again, I don't know how people make money off the streams, like the average artist. They probably don't. It was like in, my understanding as of 2020 was like 0.00331 per stream. I'm talking money here. Another stream stream, I guess revenue supposedly was, price was 0.00397. This was supposedly in 2020. Now, what's interesting to me is that the U.S. Copyright Office, because you know when you're dealing with copyrights, that's a federal government office. They said the mechanical royalty rates, their rates are, and remember, mechanical deals with publishing, right? And more specifically, what music companies or music entities pay to composers, to songwriters. Their rates for the U.S. Copyright Office are 9.5 cents per song. That's their rates, right? But you compare 9.5 cents to supposedly Spotify's 2019 rate, which was what, 0.00331 cents, 0.00437 cents, something like that.
Wow.
How are they making money? How is the average artist, or even have a big artist making money? They're making some money. The biggest artists are making some money, but not a lot. Like I said, it's set up to steal from people. They have a license. It's almost like they have a license to steal, these record companies, these music companies.
But you think about
they get you everywhere.
Yeah, like I was thinking about even with the Universal Studios fire back in 2008, while those master recordings were destroyed out in California. We don't still know what really happened, because some people said that the New York Times article that came out some years later in 2019 said that some of those masters were not destroyed, but they've been misplaced or whatever. I don't know what to make of that. It's like they got a huge insurance payout, but a lot of like unreleased stuff, takeouts were lost allegedly during that fire. Are you familiar with that Universal Studios?
I was in LA when that happened. I was living in LA when that happened.
Did you think it was very serious?
I was in Hollywood. Well, I was in Hollywood, and a guy came up to me. I was in Hollywood Boulevard. A guy came up to me and said, "Oh, there's a fire in Universal." And I responded. I said, "Yeah, that's funny. That's a good joke." I said, "No, wow. I'm not kidding. There's a fire at Universal Studios." And sure enough, when I went back home, there was a fire at Universal Studios. I'm like, "Oh, he was right, I guess." I don't know why, but I just regarded it as, "Oh, you're joking," or something like that. Very odd. But yeah, I remember that. Yeah. I remember that.
They covered up the seriousness of that. It didn't come out to years later, and I think in the New York Times article in 2019, the seriousness of that fire where you lost all these master recordings and outtakes and unreleased albums and stuff. I said, man, that's crazy. And allegedly they had a big insurance payout. You had the estates of Tupac and Tom Petty and some other people suing. Then they dropped the case, whatever. I don't know.
If there were master recordings destroyed, that's a lot of money lost. A lot of money.
Okay.
A lot of money. Yeah. So the way that I see it, and again, I don't pretend to be an expert on the music industry, but the only way that I see people, besides having a good deal, I don't know how you could get a good deal in the music industry. The only way I see that anybody can actually make money off their own music is if they build their own studio, produce and mix their own album, and put out and distribute their own music. Now, people talk about independent labels and independent artists and so forth. But as far as I'm concerned, that's really the only way that I can see how anyone can make any money off of music in the music industry. You pretty much have to control everything. That includes if you perform live, you've got to, well, I don't think anybody's doing that much, that now. But you've got to make money off of everything. You have to have your own 360 deal. You've got to be able to basically produce your music and make your music. You have to be able to do that, because that's where the ownership really comes from. It's who's producing the music, engineering it and mixing it and so forth, and who owns it. And that's the only way that I can see it. I mean, again, I don't pretend to be an expert in the music industry, but you pretty much have to control the music by producing it yourself. Literally producing your own recordings, your own albums, your own CDs, and thus having control of the masters.
Well, we've seen artists who attempt to do that. I'm thinking Sam Cooke or even Bobby Fuller, or Prince, with the digital streaming and all that. You see what happened to him, and nobody dies a natural death in showbiz. But I think people got to get over that fear, because you always going to be a slave if you don't stand up for something and stand on some type of principle. I think that's very important. Also, I want to talk. Actually, if you talk about Milli Vanilli and people not getting the proper credit for songs they contribute to, what's your take on this phenomenon like Laurel Canyon out in L.A.? The mythology behind it. Laurel Canyon. Well, all these musicians came out, like Frank Zappa, all them guys. Then all these musicians got intelligence backgrounds. Like, Jim Morrison dad was an admiral in the Navy. He was a part of the Gulf of Tonkin false flag that escalated the Vietnam War. So you got some of these musicians are part of the intelligence community, or their family very well off, but they live in this place called Laurel Canyon. out in Los Angeles.
I am aware of Laurel Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard some of what you're mentioning.
Okay.
I never investigated that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't speak to that. I can't speak to that aspect.
Well, I respect your honesty on stuff. Like when you say you don't know, you just don't know, and I respect that.
Well,
you know,
yeah, well,
you know a lot of stuff.
yeah, I mean, it's what you can look into and what you can find out. And so when I'm on a show to talk about what I know or what I found out, if I don't know about it and I haven't found out about it,
you ain't gonna talk on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't really, because it's
So
gonna sound crazy.
Yeah, I want to show this picture. This is Nancy Reagan's godmother. She was a famous silent film actress from Russia. Her name was A.L.L. Nazimova.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she was her godmother, and she owned this property out in Hollywood called the Garden of Allah. And
Yep.
like those folks, you have a lot of. She used to have crazy, wild, like Hollywood elite sex parties and orgies. So you talking about sex magic? This stuff is real because Nancy was really into the occult. She really believed in studying astrology and numerology and stuff like that. And she would advise her husband when to sign major.
I know she was into astrology. I know that.
Yeah, she was in, but that's her godmother, though. That's her godmother.
Right. And I've heard of A.L.L. Nazimova.
Yeah.
Because I think the area, trying to remember, one of the areas that she owned used to be the Garden of Allah. And
yeah, I think West Hollywood, right?
LA, I think back when I was living in LA, I think that area was now like a strip mall or something.
Yeah, but that's in West Hollywood because you living in West Hollywood, correct?
I was in West Hollywood, yeah, but that was more like Sunset.
Okay.
Well, I think on Sunset Boulevard, way on Sunset Boulevard, past what is that place? I'm trying to remember that hotel. But oh boy. But yeah, I think I was in that area years ago, where one of her properties, but it got turned into a strip mall.
Yeah,
but
so
yeah, we talk about the music. To sort of wrap up a little, at least for me, the industry. I come full circle back to Anita Baker, and well, whether it's finished or not, I don't think it is finished. People were saying that in the 2000s because of Napster. They were saying that it was finished. But they had to try to find a way to destroy Napster because they couldn't allow their not only intellectual properties, but they couldn't allow music to be democratized in the sense of sound recordings. They couldn't allow access. The success of the music industry is in limiting access, like any other industry.
Yeah.
You limit access by sales. You go out and buy a CD. You go out and buy a song. Now you can record a song, and people would do that on the radio for radio play, right? They would record a song. But the reality is that their money comes from, and they certainly got money from. I mean, certainly composers get money from radio play, or they used to. But they have to control access to their product, right? You have to pay a price for that product. And so if their product is allowed to be free, people can access it freely, they lose money. Like I said, the CD sales were going down. So they had to adapt and find other ways to make money. 360 deal was one. But I think also what they did was eventually get into the internet. And so when you look at streaming is now one of the major, it is part of the core of the recording industry, or not so much recording industry, but the music industry. It's part of where the profits are, where the money comes from. Whether it's Spotify, whether it's Apple, it's where a great deal of money is made. A lot of money is made. And of course, the talk is that the labels are invested in streaming services. So they'll have some degree of ownership.
Go ahead. Now, I don't think about the music industry. I think people give it too much credit for being hip. They're not hip. It's always the innovators, those individuals, the independent record labels. I think about Motown and Stax and Sun Records, and also I think about there's individuals pushing the envelope forward. It's never the institution. They're dinosaurs on life support. Even when you think about MTV, they didn't want to put black artists on MTV, even though Michael Jackson basically invented the music video. But they didn't want to showcase black artists for a long time. Even with rap, they didn't want to embrace rap for a long time. I think rap is the biggest music form commercially right now. Rap or so-called hip-hop, whatever y'all want to call it. But if you look at the fact that, we talked about Universal, but you look at the Bronfman family, who was a part of Universal and Vivendi, but the Bronfman family, they started Seagrams, and they was part of bootlegging and prohibition. They was working with the mob, the Meyer Lansky's, even the Joe Kennedys and whatnot, moving their liquor. So you're dealing with these type of individuals that don't have any scruples about doing whatever it takes to get the job done. And you see why they in control, certain type of individuals. Like we talked about Maurice
Levy. When I was talking about Bobby Fuller, he owned, was it Roulette Records?
Yeah, but his character was portrayed on The Sopranos as a Jewish guy.
Right, he was the basis for a character, Hesh, I think his name was.
Yeah, on Sopranos. I remember that episode when they went toe to toe with some like Death Row type of record label, and Tony Soprano thought they were going to throw down old school. They were going to throw down old school, but the dude like a Bokeem Woodbine told him, "You be hearing from our attorneys." Because they thought they're going to get down like old school style, Tony Soprano and them. But, I mean, this stuff is real. It's based on reality. Because you even look at Louis Armstrong and Billie Holiday's manager was Joe Glacier. And Joe Glacier was connected to the Chicago mob. Because Louis Armstrong had a problem early in his career when the white gangsters wanted to control his career. So he actually had to leave for Europe for a couple of years till things cooled down. And then his last manager was Joe Glacier, who was mob connected, Jewish guy who also is that Netflix documentary about the Black Godfather. That was his mentor.
Again, it's interesting when you bring up the kinds of individuals that were involved. Morris Levy is one. I talked about him in regards to the death of Bobby Fuller, but also I think it's not just the quality of individuals, but I think it's the nature, the real nature of the industry. The real nature is that it's a rapacious industry. It's an industry that is set up to be unequal and to be unfair to artists. And so, more so, I think, than a lot of other industries. More so. I mean, it's really an industry that's like half slavery and half organized crime, in my view. It really is about taking as much as they want. Like I said, it's all you can steal. And when we get back to Anita Baker, she's trying to gain ownership over music because she understands that that's where the money is. And that's what people have to understand. She's not playing games. And in one tweet, she mentioned about Spotify and their cost structure in terms of artists and how much they get. Recording artists don't like it. I don't think anybody would, because it's set up to deprive them as much profit as possible and as much revenue as possible. And that to me is the ultimate story when it comes to the music industry.
I mean, you said that I was thinking about.
Go ahead.
Now I was thinking about Amazon and how some published book authors felt like they're getting mistreated and disrespected by Amazon. Some of these publishing companies and even book authors, they're not getting all the money they should get off the Amazon platform, even though it provides for a large platform for them to be seen. They're not getting a good deal out of it. I saw a documentary on Jeff Bezos that addressed that issue. So it kind of he sounded like he got the music industry model almost for some people. And this is the American way, though. I don't think it's just in the music business. I think this is our form and way of doing business as our form of capitalism. That's how
Well, like I said, the similarities between music and publishing is in the sense of advances and recouping the cost of the advances, which is endemic in the publishing industry. That's a basic structure of the publishing industry. But the difference, I think, with the publishing industry is basically the publishing industry is set up where the publishers are going to have to make the profits because they're the ones publishing your book. And like any contract, you retain rights, because I was going to write a book myself and I got a publishing contract. I didn't end up doing it, and so when you read a publishing contract, depending on the publisher, you retain rights for X amount of years, or they retain rights for X amount of years. And then after that said time, it's supposed to revert back to you unless they re-up on those rights. So there's some similarities between publishing industry and music industry. But even the publishing industry doesn't have, you don't have the kind of, the publishing industry is nothing like the music industry in the kinds of, because the music is a much more powerful industry in terms of people's lives. I mean, music is much more powerful in terms of the impact on people's lives, or people in general, has much more reach. Publishing industry, by contrast, is very limited because you only have a small percentage of people who actually buy books on a yearly basis. So you have a relatively small audience, whereas music, it's a large audience. Far more people buy CDs and download music than they would buy a book.
I guess why I tell you, I'm not even focused on the publisher more so than it's like the money is in the distribution, like you said earlier, is in the distribution, because I look at Amazon as being a distributor, and they the one really getting the most out of this deal with the publishers. From my understanding, some of the publishers complain about their contract or arrangement with Amazon, as well as some of the authors. And you look at, is there something about distribution? Because even if you look at the fact when Suge Knight and Jay Prince from Rap-A-Lot Records and Irv Gotti from Murder Inc., they wanted to start their own distribution company. And look at how the feds were used to come against them, the federal government. I mean, they caught cases. They were being harassed by federal government agencies and stuff like that. If you look at even when Minister Farrakhan tried to work with black business people in the 80s to control distribution of hair care products, and the cartel came up against them and scared folks away from the idea. There is strength in numbers. And the sad thing about it is, when you talk about Nita Baker, you had Prince and you had Michael Jackson. I remember Michael Jackson did that press conference with Al Sharpton talking about the evils of Sony Records, and also Tommy Mottola, who was married to Mariah Carey at one point. He called him a gangster. Mariah Carey was married to this man.
Right.
And he made a career.
It's a gangsterish industry.
Yeah.
The gangsters industry. Like I said, it's set up to steal. It's not really set up. I don't want to say that it isn't legitimate. It's technically legitimate, but it's not. In many respects, the music industry is unethical, and they're all about trying to acquire as much as they can from you. So no one should be under any illusion that you're going to get a fair shake in the music industry from any of the major labels or any other aspects of it. You have to be prepared to basically be screwed by them. It's just the way that it is.
When you said that, I'm thinking about this idea of what eminent domain is. Like, people believe they own their home. You own your property, you pay all the taxes, but they could take it whenever they want to take it and give you whatever they want to give. They think it's fair. So really, everybody's getting screwed. Like, it go back to George Carlin said, it's an ownership society. If you don't own nothing, you don't have a say. The founding fathers were white men who owned stuff. Not all white men. Now the Democratic Party through Andrew Jackson gave the franchise to all so-called white men. But when the founding fathers convened to organize this thing called the United States of America, these were white men who owned stuff, including people. So, I mean,
well,
I think the industry
that's why ownership is important. That's why ownership is important.
Yes.
And that's why I'm not in the music industry. I'm a writer, not a songwriter.
But you know what? I'll be praying for Sister Anita's success in this whole thing. She's from Detroit. She ain't no pushover, no. But at the same time, I can see why Aretha Franklin was getting her money up front. You know what I'm saying? When she's doing them concerts and stuff and keeping it off the books because of how they just screw you. It's like even Billie Holiday. I mean, she was getting screwed by the industry and by her man as well as by the government. I mean, just a big. You just gets passed around like a joint, and they just use
Before
you.
I go, I just want to let people know part of, the reason I brought these out is that you have an understanding when artists talk about they hate their deals, they hate their contracts, they're not making money, you find some of these people are reduced to outright poverty and end up on the street, some of them. Just understand why. Understand the forces behind it. Understand the reasons why they may have ended up. It's not necessarily their fault. They may have some personal feelings. Yes, it's true. But in the end, they were part of forces that were aligned against them and under which they had really no support and no choice and no ability to fight back. And so I thank you for having me on the show. I hope I wasn't too long-winded for people, boring for people. So,
and shout out to let's see. No, you good, you fine, man. Don't even worry about all that stuff because these people getting game. They know no one getting anywhere else. I mean, and thank you for Warren Johnson for your donation for support of the show. But I just trying to show people they can get at you on social media. Is that Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter.
Yeah, Critic Inc. You sometimes you say Critic Incorporated, but Inc. is incorporated, but it got Critic Inc. on Twitter, and check out his amazing writings and stuff. I mean, you're very insightful young man.
No, I'm an old guy.
You're a young man,
that, but I'm an old guy.
Well,
I'm an old fart.
Well, that's a blessing in itself too. But I also go to his Medium site. I'm posting there as well. A lot of great stuff to read about Brother Albert, including his critiques on people and music and politics is all there. And I just want to wish you amplified and continued success. And thank you for sharing your gift with our audience. People. Yeah, it's an honor, man. I just you're very tenacious, you didn't give up, and you got something to say and you say it.
Oh, so. Thank you. I appreciate for you having me on. And I appreciate the nice things you say.
Well, you cool people, man. But you can't worry about, yourself. You can't please everybody. If you try to please everybody, you fail.
No.
You fail. Because
I'm not very successful at pleasing people.
That means you're effective because it means that everybody ain't gonna agree with you, but it's still that if people are willing to give you a listen, nonetheless, that means that's a sign of respect and that's earned. So,
well, I appreciate that from everyone, and I appreciate you for having me. Unfortunately, I must depart because my battery's running down. But thank you for having me on the show.
And thank you for being on the show. We appreciate it. In the words of Duke Ellington, we love you madly. Keep on producing and pushing.
Thank you.
So, family, thank you for tuning in. And like I said, this is my platform. And I do what I want to do. I have who I have on, and I say what I want to say. And a lot of y'all are benefiting from these discussions. Sometimes when, you got to say stuff, you allow people to say what they got to say, and everybody got a right to say it. And I appreciate you. Thank you, Derek, for tuning in. Thank y'all for tuning in. Yeah, people just need to stop worrying about what people think about what they say or who they are. You can't control what people think about you. You can't control how people view you. You could save somebody's life and they still hate your guts. You understand? So really, you got to be a friend to yourself. You got to love thyself, know thyself, and just be thyself. To thy own self be true. So thank y'all for rocking where we all be. Thank you all for listening who supported this live stream through donations. All you I shouted out, really appreciate it because they are really clamping down on freedom of speech and freedom of expression ain't really free because you always pay a price when you speak your mind and you be yourself. So thank you all. Yeah, I'm just supposed. Thank you, G Mars, and y'all. I'm just blessed to have a very insightful and knowledgeable following of people on this We All Be TV platform. Y'all really add substance and spice to the conversation gumbo. So I appreciate y'all. And I didn't know some of y'all been rocking with me for a long time. Y'all send me emails and stuff. Let me know that y'all been watching and listening. And so this work has not been in vain. So you could support We All Be, because knowledge is the currency of the universe, but you still I need currency to pay my bills and whatnot, like you all do. Cash App your support, $R2C2H2. You can PayPal, Google Pay, or Venmo your support at R2C2H2 @gmail.com. You also can Zelle it. That's it. Wait a minute. Excuse me. Venmo is at R2C2H2. And Zelle is R2C2H2 @gmail.com. And PayPal and Google Pay is R2C2H2. And you go buy art of his art. You see all this art, R2C2H2.com. You can wear. I got my March 5th, 1770 shirt on in honor of Crispus Attucks. I'm sure. Got this shirt on honor of Crispus Attucks. You can buy that. Go to the Teespring shelf below the description on the YouTube video. Access the latest and greatest designs. And I got a couple of shows coming up to close out this month. Very powerful. We're going to have on Sister Gloria Jackson. Sister Gloria Jackson, who is the sister of Mark Clark, who was the defense captain of the Black Panther Party up in Illinois. We're going to have him have his sister on to talk about her brother's amazing legacy. He died with Fred Hampton Sr. on December 4th, 1969. He was just 22 years young himself, but he's not talked about like he should be talked about. And, in the Judas and the Black Messiah movie came out, they didn't really talk about him that much. Towards the end, they showed the guy playing him, but we don't know his backstory. So we thank his sister for the glory of telling her brother's backstory. So she's going to be on the show tomorrow. Make sure you subscribe and I guess click the bell, because I know a lot of people don't get the lives when they go live. And they doing their little shadow acts, because I don't trust the numbers, because it's weird, because I go outside and people tell me they listen to the show. They can name parts of the show. I say, okay, but I look at my numbers, I look at my subscribers, it's like it's not adding up. But we don't do the work for the likes. I don't do it for the likes. I do it for the love of the people. So thank y'all for receiving. Yes. And we love you madly, brother Mark. Thank y'all. And I got some, like I said, I got some bangers to end the month of March. And y'all keep on producing and pushing, and know that the best is yet to come. Thank y'all. God bless. One love. Keep the faith. Yeah, yeah.